do it.
Okay, well, I'm gonna go ahead and get started.
Katie.
All right, can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Well, hi everyone. Thank you so much for being here tonight. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Annie Kaplan, and I'm the Adult Services Librarian at Sayre Public Library. And Heather, do you want to introduce yourself?
I'm Heather Manchester. I'm the director of Sayre Public Library.
And over the last several months, we have been holding a series of community conversations on racial equity and inclusion that a lot of you took part in. So tonight we will be presenting our findings from those conversations. So I'm going to start off by introducing Libraries Transforming Communities, which is the grant that we received earlier this year that funded this process. I'll then explain the Turning Outward model that we used as a framework for these conversations. I'll then go on to share participants' aspirations and concerns for the community, as well as actions people think we can take to bridge the gap between where we are now and where we want to be. And then I'll wrap up with some resources that the library will be offering on racial equity and inclusion. And then I'll leave some time at the end for Q&A.
I'm going to give a little overview. I know that some of you know the process that we used to get this grant that provided the funds to have this series of conversations. But for those of you who weren't part of that, these conversations took place as part of the Libraries Transforming Communities grant, focused on small and rural libraries. And that was done in conjunction with American Library Association and the Association for Rural and Small Libraries. We were chosen as one of 200 libraries to participate. We found out in December of 2020 that we received one of these grants, and we've been working since to plan and implement the grant, beginning our conversations in March of 2021 and having our last conversation in July of 2021. And the idea for the topic of our grant, which is racial equity and inclusion, really came about because of some articles that we had seen in our local newspaper. The first was regarding a racial slur that was done as part of vandalism in one of our local parks and a response to that. And our second article that kind of led to me thinking about this might be a good topic to discuss in our community was an article on a Black Lives Matter event that was held on the park that is actually directly across from our library. At the time, and we continue to have a Teen Reading Lounge grant, and several of our teens actually brought up the fact that there had been an event there and the response in our community, which there were some favorable responses and some not so favorable responses. So that really drove a lot of conversation within our teen group and made me realize that this is a topic that we really I hadn't seen at that point addressed in an extended way amongst all of our community. And so when I saw this grant opportunity come across my desk, I started to connect with some people. Annie had come into the library before she started working with us to talk about doing programming for children, actually, about racial equity and inclusion. And we talked about this grant opportunity, and in the process, she actually became one of our staff members. So that worked really well to have her join us and be able to implement this grant, and we partnered in doing that. And we also partnered with the Valley Racial Equity Coalition as part of this, coming up with the need for it. We had a listening session on Zoom to really get a sense from our community members. Is this something that we want to talk about? And resoundingly, we heard, yes, this is something we need to talk about. And so all of that came together for our application. And luckily we were one of the awardees, so we were able to put together these community conversations along with a book club that went in conjunction with it. Not everybody who participated in the conversations participated in the book club, but we also offered that as well.
So for this conversation series, we made the decision to use the Harwood Institute for Public Innovation's Turning Outward model. So this was a step-by-step approach designed to allow public organizations like ourselves to better understand our communities. And in this turning outward process, we consciously reoriented ourselves towards the public so that we could really see and hear those in the community. So this posture has allowed us to begin to understand our local reality for what it is, so that we can deal with its implications and its ramifications and act with intentionality to create change. We really wanted our work moving forward to be relevant and significant. So in order for this to be so, we needed to first gain a deep and authentic understanding of the nature of our community and people's lives so that we could begin to understand the conditions that needed to be created for change to come about. So these conversations were formatted in a way that allowed us to generate public knowledge that we can now use to inform decision-making of all kinds. So over the last several months, community members throughout the Valley have attended these conversations and made their voices heard. So we as facilitators asked participants the following questions.
As Annie said, the Turning Outward model has a series of 10 questions that you work your way through, and we have someone taking notes, and after each conversation, we really went through those notes and categorized them in certain ways, and there's a involved process that kind of helps us gather this information up, that wealth of public knowledge. And so the 10 questions that were asked were, what kind of community do you want? And we included in terms of one that is racially equitable and inclusive, because that was our topic area. What are the most important factors when it comes to making the community racially equitable and inclusive? What concerns do you have about this issue and why? How do the issues we're talking about affect you personally? When you think about racial equity and inclusion, how do you feel about what's going on? What do you think is keeping us from making the progress we want? When you think about what we've talked about, what are the kinds of things that could be done that would make a difference? Thinking back over the conversations, what groups or individuals would you trust to take action on these things? If we came back together in 6 months or a year, what might you see that would tell you that the things we talked about were starting to happen? And finally, now that we've talked about this issue a bit, what questions do you have about it? So we did these questions usually about 2 at a time, although I think in the first session, we just did the first question, and we always ended our sessions with question number 10 of, what other questions do we have? Because the conversations often would bring up more questions than answers as we delved into things, but we really worked our way in a thorough manner through these 10 questions.
Yeah, so we heard from community members about their aspirations for the community, their concerns, how people think and talk about racial equity and inclusion in relation to our community, the changes needed to reach folks' aspirations for our community, and what people believe we can do to take action. So we compiled the notes that we had taken over the last several months and used that to create this community narrative. So to summarize that story, people want to live in a community that is safe and welcoming to everyone, a community where folks are willing to hold themselves accountable for how they affect others, and a community that is open-minded and prioritizes an accurate education of our nation's history. However, the current lack of diversity in our area, the impact of misinformation, the biases and stereotypes that people hold, and the structural and systemic issues at play that support and maintain the status quo are making that difficult. It was also clear that people believe there are tangible steps we can take. Things like building relationships within our community, listening to people who have experienced racial discrimination, investing in education, forming safe spaces to discuss matters of racial equity and inclusion, and continually calling attention to racial injustices. So that's a lot, so let me break all of that down. As far as aspirations go, the folks we heard from want to live in a community that is welcoming to everyone, a community where people of all races, cultures, and ethnicities are included and treated equitably. Participants want to live in an area where everyone feels safe, where people really hold themselves accountable for how their actions and perceptions affect others. One participant used the line, looking at the man in the mirror. So really taking an honest look at ourselves and seeing how our culture has influenced us as individuals. So that involves each of us, diving within ourselves and examining our racial perceptions and racial conditioning. Because as one participant put it, if you hold yourself accountable, the world won't have to. Other community members talked about wanting to see a more open-minded community where people are willing and open to education and knowledge, and where people have a willingness to want to change for the better. So where folks are interested in learning more about racial groups beyond their own. As one participant remarked, asking how we can learn more is important, but it also makes us vulnerable. So having the humility and willingness to be vulnerable and to admit that we don't know what we don't know is pretty essential in working towards the community's aspirations. And then the importance of education was brought up time and time again. Many people share their aspiration to live in a community that invests in our children's education and that prioritizes an accurate education of our nation's history and current events. Participants expressed things like, you should want to give kids the truth. Black history should be everyone's history. As Americans, we all have a shared history. So people aspire to live in a community that tells the truth about that history and every group of people involved in it. And further, folks want our schools to be safe places where children and teens can show up as their most authentic selves and know that they'll be supported in that. And what I so deeply admire about so many of the community members who attended these conversations is that they have an unwavering aspiration to live in a community that really stands for what is right and what is equitable. As one participant quoted, "We must stand for something or else we'll fall for anything." Now, these aspirations are, I believe, completely attainable. However, there are several concerns about the community at large and this issue that we've been exploring that point to why we've not yet reached a state of racial equity and inclusion here. So for one thing, understanding the truth is absolutely fundamental to achieving racial harmony. So the presence of misinformation poses a serious threat to that process. Community members are concerned about the effects of white media and a white-centered narrative. No single racial group can possibly know or report the full story about anything. So folks are concerned that there are some people who may believe otherwise. Education is also imperative to creating change. And folks expressed that at this point in time, school curriculums are not adequately equipping teachers or giving educators the room to teach an accurate and inclusive history of the United States. We heard from folks that although there are efforts being made, by a number of really exceptional teachers in our area, educators who have tried to be racially conscientious in their teachings of current and historical events have been met with pushback by some school administrations and school boards and even some parents. So in discussing what is preventing us from making progress in this arena, the question came up, why are people against learning their true history? And folks responded that they're concerned that some people might be afraid of the truth because it's not always how we grew up learning it. And that can be scary. So in addition to providing a proper education, there's a serious concern about children and teens' well-being at school. So looking at biases and stereotypes, someone asked, have you talked to a high school student lately? So we had the privilege of hearing from high school students, both past and present, and heard really heartbreaking stories, ranging from kids being singled out and bullied because of the color of their skin, to children being persuaded by their own teacher to read aloud a racial slur during class. So people are concerned that no bullying policies are not being enforced, and that the adults meant to protect children and teach them right from wrong are not always doing so. And during our discussions about school environments, many folks voiced their concern about the local school mascot, which I won't name out loud because it is a racial slur. But having this mascot communicates a constant message of oppression to the people in this community for their entire childhood. You know, Indigenous people are people, not mascots. So stereotypes of Indigenous people that have been manufactured by dominant cultures are extremely offensive and harm human development in many ways, especially in children. Folks who have graduated from here expressed in these conversations how difficult it was to come to learn that they had gone their entire lives not realizing the impact that this mascot has on people. But that's the thing about being someone from the dominant culture, about being white, is that sometimes we can go our entire lives playing a role in a system of oppression and not even realize it. And like one local graduate said, it can be hard to chip away at the pedestal. So that brings me to folks' concerns surrounding the systemic and structural issues at play that work to support and maintain the status quo. And the particular systemic issues that we discussed are those rooted in race-based oppression. We heard from community members about their worries regarding the school to prison pipeline, the economic disparities between different races of people that arise from generational wealth or the lack thereof. We heard about families' concerns over power dynamics and the lack of transparency in policing, and just the overall violent culture of policing in this country. One mother expressed her constant worry for the safety of her child, and in reference to the countless lives that have been taken at the hands of law enforcement, she said, "What do I do as a mother? What do I tell my son? He's a Black man behind the wheel of a car. He doesn't have to do anything," referring to the fact that a person of color can be harmed and even murdered for going about their lives in ways that white people do every day with little to no consequence. And that there is an entire system and culture that allows that to happen. Another big concern for people is the lack of diversity in this area. So during our conversations, we dove deeper into this topic, and participants asked questions such as, why does the lack of diversity here not prompt anyone else to wonder why that's so? What behaviors do we have to make it seem like you are not welcome? Why are we so white here? How welcoming have we been? People also asked, why aren't we changing? And folks brought up that they're concerned that people seem afraid to change here. So we really have to turn the lens back on ourselves, as one participant put it, and investigate what we are doing to make it so that Black, Brown, African American, Indigenous, Asian, Hispanic, and Latinx, Pacific Islanders, and people of color do not feel welcome here. If people do not feel welcome here, those of us in the dominant population will remain in our own world, as one participant put it. Never connecting with those outside of our own racially homogenous circles, never expanding our worldview to encompass a fuller reality. Everyone loses. As one community member said, we are all affected. So as concerning as all of this is, it definitely does not have to be this way. There are steps we can take that would make a difference. And as one participant put it, we need to do a lot of work. So what do we work on? Well, this is not an entirely comprehensive list, but these are some of the main things we could work on that people believe would actually make a difference. So during these conversations, it was brought up how people move out of this area because they are not made to feel comfortable here. So folks asked, what would it take to keep our friends and neighbors of color here? What could we do? Participants agreed that it is essential to build relationships within the community. We can work towards racial inclusion by including people. We can also listen to people when they share that they've experienced racial discrimination. We can stand with and support those who have been targets of racist aggressions. And one participant made a point of reminding us all to be very conscious of not trying to suggest what folks of color should do. So instead, take a you lead, we'll follow approach. Folks also stressed the importance of education and that we should be investing our time and energy into educating ourselves as well as our children. We can learn the true history of the United States and teach that to the next generation. We can educate ourselves on structural and systemic segregation and how that plays out in people's lives. We can deepen our understanding of what it means to live in an inherently biased system, and that if we are not actively working to dismantle that system, we are complicit in upholding it. We can encourage local administrations to make changes to the school curriculum so that current events and history taught to children is taught inclusively. And we can support the teachers at schools who give so much of themselves so that their students can learn from the mistakes of the past and become informed, compassionate humans. We can also create safe spaces to talk about issues surrounding racial equity and inclusion. As one community member said, we need to make that safe space and then find a way to talk through these things. All of the concerns that were raised by community members during these conversations are not going to simply disappear or get better on their own. We must talk about them if we are to have any shot at making progress in this realm. So Black, Brown, Indigenous, Asian, Hispanic, and Latinx, Pacific Islanders, and people of color deserve to be able to share their experiences with people who are willing to hear them. And white folks need to have spaces where they can bring the judgments they hold into the light, where we can become conscious of our habits of harm, so that instead of perpetuating them, we can heal and transform them. Folks also mentioned that it could make a huge difference if Guthrie, our area's most diverse employer, started a conversation within the organization about how they can work towards racial equity and inclusion and create these spaces where people can talk about these things. And when our brothers and sisters of color are made to suffer, we must call attention to it, not to diminish the acuity of or take away from others' suffering, but because it's only right for those of us in the dominant culture to raise our awareness of and sensitivity to the suffering that is a result of particular biases that those of us in the dominant culture can just ignore oftentimes and even cover up. As one person stated, we know better, we must do better. So that looks like doing things like pointing out racially offensive comments that someone makes, or calling your local politicians if they're supporting discriminatory legislation. So, at this point in time, all of the knowledge and resources that we require to move in the right direction are available to us. We have all the tools we need to create the community that we have the potential to be. And as someone conveyed during our conversations, I'm ready to be part of the solution. So if you are ready, I invite you to really sit with what we've gone over today and notice if you are resistant to any part of it. And then notice what happens if, instead of turning away from that resistance, you lean into it. What arises within you? Fear, anger, blame, shame, frustration, sorrow. All of these feelings are totally valid. This is a very serious issue with very serious and very real consequences. But we are not powerless in the movement for racial equity and inclusion. We can use the power of our emotions to motivate us to change and to act. And as one participant put it, it's a marathon, not a sprint. Our nation's culture has been built on an inequitable and exclusive foundation. So racial equity and inclusion are not going to be achieved overnight. This is lifelong work. But we at Sayre Public Library aim to be a resource for anyone wanting to learn more about how we can go about pursuing racial harmony. So we have a few events coming up that we are offering to the entire community. So from October 11th through November 11th, we will be holding an exhibit at the library to highlight the history of Indigenous people in our county. Then on October 21st, we will be having a presentation on jazz and the civil rights movement. And that will be given by jazz musician and lecturer Galen Abdur-Razak. And then on November 18th, we will be hosting a presentation on white allyship titled A Whisper, a Yell, a Roar. And that will be given by the founder of Mothers Helping Mothers, Jessica Belgrave. We will also be offering information sheets at the library that summarize what we've presented today. And then for folks wanting to work towards racial literacy, we have a new racial equity and inclusion collection. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, Heather?
Sure. As part of the grant, we also were able to add a little over $500 worth of materials dealing with racial equity and inclusion. And those are materials for all ages. So we have picture books and board books for our youngest readers and families to read to children, really looking at acceptance and celebration of that. We got also some nonfiction picture books that deal with major events in the civil rights movements in our country, all the way up through middle grade and young adult books that deal with racial equity topics. And then for our adult readers, we have a large number of nonfiction books on all different aspects, from history to how racism affects the prison system, the workplace, a lot of different factors and areas, economics. And these titles were culled through many different reading lists reading articles in the paper. I belong to a Facebook group called Anti-Racist Librarians, so I got a lot of recommendations there. And they are all right now on display in a special area of our library to focus on this topic. We made special book plates to put in them to recognize they are part of this racial equity and inclusion collection. And I know Annie has done a Facebook Live on that, and we'll probably be featuring over the next few months individual titles so people can really delve into the topics of the books that we have. So I invite you, in doing your own individual work, to check out some of these titles and really go in depth, because there are so many authors out there that take an aspect that we may not be aware of in our history, or how it affects a certain area of our country and our world, but they've gone in depth. And as we said before, education is so important, and I don't believe that education ends with our schooling. So this is something that we hoped to be able to give to the community, not only to supplement K through 12 education, but for lifelong learners as well.
Okay. And then I just want to close with a quote from The Hill We Climb by Amanda Gorman. "If we're to live up to our own time, then victory won't lie in the blade, but in all the bridges we've made. That is the promise to Glade. The hill we climb, if only we dare. It's because being American is more than a pride we inherit. It's the past we step into and how we repair it." Thank you all for listening. And if anyone wants to connect with us, you can check out our website. That is sarapl.org, or find us on Facebook. And then we're also on Instagram. And these are all of our information and handles for those. So thank you all. And yeah, I will now open it up to any questions or comments that anyone has.
Hey, Annie, thank you for putting this on, and the Sarah Public Library as well. Overall, great presentation. I really like how you said it's truly a team effort. It's a joint effort. And one, not being from the area, being from the South, and also being African American here, there was a bit of culture shock for me, because I didn't expect it to be so few African Americans here. And I can remember when I first moved in and I was getting my internet set up, and the cable technician said to me, "Oh, you're number 26. And I just kind of looked at him like, "Number 26 what?" And he said, "Oh, you're the 26th Black person probably here in the area." I didn't take offense to it, but I knew something needed to change. He didn't say it from a place of malice. It was just a place of poor education there. And I took the opportunity to educate him. And I've had another issue here in the area where a person called me a not so nice name. And it all depends on how you handle the situation, because I know my worth. I know the value I bring. And if that's the word that you choose to call me, that's truly a reflection of how you see yourself. And I took it that way. But I'm proud to live here in the area. I look forward to retiring here in the area. And I'm a part of the Guthrie community as well. And I can say that Guthrie has heard it, not just from the employee stands, but also from the community too, where they are truly working to create a more inclusive environment. But thank you, ladies, for putting this work together. And I look forward to partnering with you in whatever capacity that I can.
Yeah, thank you, Tamara.
You're welcome.
Tamara, where do you work?
I work for Guthrie Hospital.
Okay. I wondered if whether there has been any activity on their part.
Oh, yes, ma'am. A lot of activity. Yeah, a lot of activity is taking place. A lot of good conversation. So the community, and I think I saw Dr. Kaladi pop on, but Guthrie has started the conversation, and our new CEO, along with other senior leadership team, they're taking it serious, and the health system is looking to, like I said, create a more inclusive environment for all.
That's awesome to hear.
Yes.
That is awesome to hear that. Great.
Really has the potential to have a major impact. Is this presentation available online? Is this was recorded, right?
Yes, yep, so that will be available for any folks to view.
On the library's website?
We'll probably link it to the website and post it on Facebook. And then we're also creating an information sheet with all of the talking points that Annie went over with the aspirations, concerns, that will also be able to be picked up at the library. So we'll have a printed out copy of the information as well as the videos being recorded and able to be shared.
Good.
And we're also definitely willing to talk to any organizations in our area that might be interested in hearing this from us, because really the point of the grant is to create, you know, a repository of public knowledge. So now that we have this knowledge, we'd love to talk to stakeholders in the education field, in the healthcare field, in small businesses, all of these different areas, to be able to have direct quotes from our community members saying, this is what we're seeing, this is what we want, because we really feel like that wealth of knowledge is a jumping off point. So anyone that we can share it with, we'd be glad to do so. And please make connections with us, because we're definitely willing to go out and talk to people about what we found out with this.
So what is the next step? I mean, you listed wonderful things, you know, getting the schools, you know, what, petitioning schools to provide accurate history? Has there been any movement towards actually talking to the schools?
Well, we really see our role at the library is providing a space for that to take action. So as Annie and I have discussed, we're definitely here to provide resources, and also for those who are interested in taking next steps, to also provide that space to continue the discussion. Using that turning outward model, there's other steps to that as well. So there are things called innovation spaces, and really looking for those openings of where in our community could we start to take action. And so we're looking at the possibility of finding additional grant funding, having, you know, I know Annie put out a survey to the people who were involved in this group of what are our next steps that you'd like to do there. So we're taking that information and saying, you know, we'd like to keep this group of interested community members going. But as far as the taking action part, that's really going to be up to the participants of where we see that. Where would you like to go with this? So we're definitely excited to provide that next step. And again, having that base of public knowledge will help us in finding additional funding and finding those connections to say, we have information now, where can we start to take action? But this is a concern. Any other questions or comments?
I see Victor has a hand raised.
Thank you. I just wanted to thank you for this presentation and validate what Tamara was saying a few minutes ago, and I hope that I do work with her on a body within the Guthrie system that talks about issues like this month after month. And I hope we can go back and begin to do something with this. So I hope we will have running feet as we leave this presentation today. So I mean, speaking for Tamara and myself. Thank you.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you.
I want to comment on what a wonderful presentation you guys did to collect all this information, the note taking, very impressive, and putting all this together. So thank you very much for your effort in doing this.
Thanks so much for saying that, Chris.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you all for just showing up month after month, being willing to talk about all of this.
We put it together, but you were the ones that were really vulnerable enough and dedicated enough to give us that information and your impressions and your concerns and your questions. And I know that coming away from some of those conversations, they were not easy conversations to have. I mean, we really did sit with the weight of it in talking about that. So thank you for coming back month after month and being willing to go through this process with us.
Mm.
Yeah, I'm thinking of like audience, right? It's like, should our commissioners be the elected representatives? Should they be the ones who are required to at least have a summary of this, right? Or summary of this summary if they don't have a whole lot of time. And then all sorts of community groups that we have who are interested in supporting people in the community or maintaining both.
Yeah, we invited all the county commissioners, yeah, and our elected officials, but I'll definitely be sending them a summary of all of this as well.
Andy, did you hear anything back from any of the commissioners?
No.
I do want to take a moment to recognize and thank Susan Banks. She is from the Office of Commonwealth Libraries. So our state oversight, she's now give me if I get this incorrect, please correct me. Acting Deputy Secretary and State Librarian, is that correct, Susan?
That is right. You got it
okay.
right.
So she is joining us tonight, and we are so glad to have her as part of our group.
So proud of the work that you did. You should be very proud of the work that you've done. As you know, the Office of Commonwealth Libraries has been on this trail for a while, and what you did is such a great example of how this works in the field, on the ground, with the impetus of a community that wants to become more welcoming and wants to become what it can be rather than just what it is. And that is such a wonderful place for the library to be at the center of and convening those conversations. Congratulations. And now you've done it though. You've shown that you're willing and able. So there are some statewide efforts that we're working on, some of which we talked about at the association conference today. Continuation of our work for Including You, which is all about belonging and taking it down to the community level. And I have a feeling that Sarah Public Library might be one of our pilot places to test out our work with the Humanities Council in community-based work on belonging and acceptance. So keep your eyes out for that. I'm gonna have to follow up. Yeah.
Susan, do you know if there's anything comparable going on in the library system in New York State. I'm from New York State.
Ah, yeah.
Me too. Me too.
That's a good question. I was just in a meeting with my counterpart in the association that we have, that's just the chief of library officers of state library agencies. And Lori Moore is the state librarian in New York. And we were talking about this, but to my great, let me just say irritation, it was all about how we can be more police behavior inside of this is the association. And I was like, can we please talk about what we can do on the ground, please? But I do know how to look at what Lori's got going on in New York State a little bit more. Your regional agencies are notorious for doing amazing work. So definitely might be some things going on. I'll take a look at what I can find and pass some of the news along to our friends at SARE.
Good, that would be great. I love our local library system. It's wonderful, and they do all kinds of outreach stuff, but I have not seen anything dealing with equity and inclusion.
We've been pushing it at the state level here for quite some time, so we do have a little bit of momentum. But the other states are, you know, it's definitely kind of in the nature of libraries to pursue this work. And we're in such a good position to do that. Being a part of the Department of Education, the Office of Commonwealth Libraries is kind of uniquely situated to pursue it when like K-12 is not. So some of the discussion that you were having around what you talked about education and the changes that you'd like to see made, and how to go about doing that, as you know, in tandem with the educational structure, is different in every state for sure. And in our state, actually libraries and schools work very similarly, that they have a lot of local power. But I've also been doing work we've been doing a lot of work within the Department of Education. So I also am thinking, oh, I'm going to have to turn Nicole Holland Sims, who's our special assistant to the secretary in equity, inclusion, and belonging. So I'm going to tell her all about this and share the presentation with her and say, look what's happening. And they really want to see something happening in the schools. So I have this feeling that Nicole might be able to make some connections for us that might be able to bridge this conversation between the library and the folks who the library is already engaged, and the school and the people who can actually make some changes. So I'm going to put that in the system at the state level too.
I just want to say, what are the state initiatives too, including you, which I know this group talked about, I believe almost every session, did a wonderful workshop on communication and really the importance of communication. And so as part of our resources, I can see that coming down the pipeline as well, of really taking the information that I was able to take as a participant in that and spreading that wider, because I know that was something everybody just said, how do we speak about this? How do we check our own communication and how we talk about that? And so including you is just a wonderful exploration of how do we do this?
Yeah, it's that practical step of practicing and doing it together and talking about it and committing together that really begins to change those foundational pieces at a practical, physical, and immediate level. And yeah, thanks for bringing that along with you.
Well, I like the fact that you have books, a collection of books that you can offer. And so is there a list to the books that belong in this category?
As part of our information packet, we'll have the list of the books we were able to purchase through this grant. And then I believe we'll probably start keeping an ongoing list, because that was another initiative that Annie brought to the library through a different workshop. We talked about really kind of doing a diversity audit. So now when we bring new books into the library, Annie goes through all of them to see, do these books fall within certain categories of diversity? So we're able to point people to books that have main characters of people of color, books that address, different concerns that we have. People can see picture books where children can see characters that look like them. And so we're keeping track of that right now in a way that we're able to not only share with our patrons of our library, but to share with our staff, so they are able to say, oh, these are some new books in that you may like, or that you may not have heard, but here are some that you might be interested in as well too. So yeah, we'll have a book list that goes along with the grant books, but we're keeping an ongoing list of books that come into the library as well too.
Right. And the second part I wanted to mention is that I love that you also have events, like live events at, but not everybody like to read, right? Or have time to read. So it'd be nice. Yeah, it's really nice that you have a combination of these things. So that the thing about the events that popped into my head is that people who might want to go to them might not have the resource to get to wherever these events are. And so is there plans to kind of set up something to make sure that people who would like to attend would be offered a way to get there?
That's a really good point, because that is something that across the board in libraries, we talk about how do we get people in, and now I think a big initiative is how do we get ourselves out? And so for some of these events, it may be more of an outreach situation where can we find locations where the people we want to reach already are, and put our programming out there to them, rather than expect them to come to us. And now one thing that has helped with this is a virtual platform, because we saw with this especially conversation, people have been able to participate that don't necessarily live nearby, but also thinking in the future about where else can we do some of these events, where these programs that really are going to be places that people are already going and are involved with, and how do we connect with that? And the other thing we've talked about too, and that's something that we're exploring is, and I think that came about of our conversations, is how can we do more intergenerational programming? Because we've been very, in our own lane very much with a lot of our library programs. So we do our children's programs, or we do our teen programs, or we do our programs for adults or seniors. And as part of these conversations, we found, boy, it really helps to hear each other's perspectives. And how do we get to these youngest minds and start early to think about these things? And so part of the work that we're doing is thinking of, can we think about the programs and events that we offer differently? So we're naturally putting different age groups together, putting different people together that don't naturally maybe come together, but in a way that we can listen to each other's voices and influence our thinking, because that's where it happens. We want to be able to not only share the wisdom of our books and materials, but the wisdom of each other's voices and generational knowledge and things like that. So I think that's all part of our forward thinking. How it gets implemented still may not have all those pieces in place, but those are things that we're thinking about going forward. Of these are things we want to see in our library, and it's come about because of the conversations we've had here.
Thank you.
I was I was going to ask about the same kind of thing that Chris mentioned. Could you tell us a little bit more about this exhibit, this month-long exhibit on the indigenous peoples of Bradford County? And of course, right now we're in a very high case rate with COVID. So what are your plans for dealing with that?
Yeah, so I'm not, maybe Heather, you want to speak more about the COVID plans? So I'm not entirely sure about that aspect of it. But as far as the exhibit itself goes, we're going to be highlighting some authors that we have in our local history collection. One of the biggest ones is Deb Twigg, who, has the SRAC down in Waverly. And then we are going to be borrowing artifacts and materials from the Tioga Point Museum at Spalding Library. So they are letting us borrow a bunch of just old artifacts that they have. And then we'll just be displaying that in our display case in the main area of the library. And as of now, we are requiring all patrons to be wearing masks. So anyone coming in to see it will have to have a mask on. And then we're also going to be having a presentation from someone from the Tioga Point Museum as well. And I'm not 100% sure where they are on that. We've been having conversations about whether to do it outside or virtual. So yeah, it definitely will not be indoors. And I think we're leaning more towards doing that virtually, just over Zoom for now.
Thank you. Thanks.
To follow up on the COVID things, we are really doing it more virtual right now, outdoors where possible, but the weather is getting a little more chilly. Another thing we're looking at doing is having more what's called passive programming. So things that people can become engaged with, but maybe don't have to gather as a group. And so informational things that people can pick up and interact with. We have some different tools for our teens that are more electronic that they can become engaged with, like a virtual scavenger hunt and things like that. So we're really starting to explore like what are ways to continue to keep this topic going, this engagement going, but maybe not get all together as a big group, spreading that engagement out over time, but still showing the importance and getting people involved.
Great. Thank you.
Vanessa?
Hi. I just wanted to make a quick suggestion because Heather was talking about getting out there into different community spaces. I can recommend one if that's okay. There's a new community center in Athens called the Rise and Shine Community Center. They're pretty new and they are looking for events and they are looking for people to come and do all kinds of stuff. And maybe that would be a good idea to get in contact with them. The owner, Lisa, is really nice. And I'm sure she'd want to work out something because they're looking for ways to help the community because they're the community center. And maybe that would be a good one, right? They're right next to the the little Chinese restaurant in Athens. And they're brand new. Barely anybody knows they're there, but they're there. And she wants to do more stuff to help with the community. And maybe that would be a good place to have an event of some kind. I just wanted to suggest them.
Yeah, thank you.
That's a great suggestion. Yeah, I think today was the third time they came across my radar. And I always feel like, okay, when it hits 3, I'm like, I've got to check this out. So yeah, thanks. Well, I just want to say thank you again for participating in these conversations. It was so valuable to us to be able to hear your voices and your concerns. And as I said, I think as weighty as the conversations got, I never left one without feeling that, we're amongst caring, good people who want to see change and who want to see our community be a welcoming and better place. And I think that's where we start. And I'm so glad to have our library be a part of that change. And I don't think we're going away. I think we're going to continue this mission. And again, always looking for opportunities of different ways to help with that. And so as we get more opportunities, we will definitely be in touch with you to share those opportunities. And again, if we're, Annie and I have talked about ongoing, because we did kind of get used to that regular monthly meeting of conversations. And so if it continues in that format or takes a different format, we'd love to discuss that with you.
Great.
Well, I just want to say that I'm so proud of being in a community with a library such as the Sayre Library. So thank you very much for doing the work you do and getting the grant. And yeah, doing amazing work. It's really makes me proud to be a community member.
Yep, I applaud you too. It's excellent all through. And this presentation tonight was excellent. Thank you so much. And I'm going to sign out. Bye-bye.
You
Thanks,
too. Thanks,
Bye.
everybody.
Thank you,
Great
everybody.
work.
Good night.
Thank you
Bye-bye.
all. Good night.
Bye. Good night.
Right, good night.
Bye,
Thanks for
Victor.
attending.
All right, bye-bye, good night.
Bye, thank you.